Today is May 6, 2017. Before we begin our study and discussion, let's ask our Heavenly Family to guide us. Eloheinu Todah Lakal, thank you for everything. Give us guidance, please, wisdom. Help us to think according to reason and truth and love. Give us the ability to have a genuine experiment in this discussion tonight. Thank you so much for preserving the community rule and for giving us principles by which we can put it to the test. Thank you so much for all of this. We ask what we do, Eloheinu, our mighty ones, B'Shem Tzemach, Hu He, in the name of branch, he and she. Truth.
Amen.
Yeah, the whole true that thing. It's interesting how, we all say amen, and so many times we don't think of what it means. It just becomes a habit to say amen when really it means that's true or true that. And it's kind of interesting how we'll translate other Hebrew phrases, but we don't translate that one. But perhaps we should. So anyway, we'll be going through the community rule again tonight, as we definitely want to get to the bottom of it. So we'll follow our same pattern. A summary, broad questions and answers, then line-by-line investigation. So the community rule, as I'm sure you all know who are on the call, is a text that was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which of course was a library of ancient Jewish writings that was discovered in the 1940s and 50s. And the library itself originally belonged to a group of Jews from the 2nd century BCE into the 1st century CE. And during that period, those writings and the scrolls themselves that were found were copied, even though some of the actual texts or some of the compositions that were copied and are represented in the scrolls, of course, were authored sometimes many centuries before then. But these texts are very, very important. And the community rule is important among that library for several reasons. One reason is that it tells us a lot about the community of Jews who had these Dead Sea Scrolls, and tells us, basically who they were, what they believed, what they did, how they practiced Judaism, their mission, their identity, all of that sort of thing. More than that, the community rule actually is significant among the Dead Sea Scrolls because it also has among the highest number of parallels to the writings of the Nazarenes. The Nazarenes, of course, were the early followers of Jesus. And so for anyone interested in the origins of the Jesus group, the community rule is certainly significant. And, the group of Jews whose beliefs and practices it represents is typically known as Essenes. And that group serves as somewhat of a forerunner to the John the Baptist group and the Jesus group. Although, of course, the Essenes in the days of Jesus and John certainly did not agree with them on all points, nor did Jesus and John agree with the Essenes on all points. In any case, the Dead Sea Scrolls are highly significant. Obviously, we've talked about this in many previous studies. Another reason why the community rule is so important for us is because it puts forward a way of wiping away sin, which is the same way that our Heavenly Family has given to us. And it has the mission of bringing about the final wiping away of sin, which of course is the mission that we have as well. So the community rule is very significant for those reasons. And, one of the amazing teachings found within the community rule is the teaching on the two spirits, or the two principles, truth and falsehood. And that's the section that we've been studying right now. Of course, there's a preceding section and there are following sections as well. But this section dealing with the two spirits is what we have been primarily focused on for some time now in our studies of the community rule. So that's a basic overview of what the community rule is and why we find it important and why we are studying it. And of course, I'll mention that our methods in our study are to first seek to understand what the community rule itself says, what the claims of it are, and for that sort of thing we want to understand, well, who wrote this, when was it written, for what purpose was it written, what does it mean when it says each particular phrase. And then with an accurate understanding of the claims put forward in the community rule, we want to find out whether those claims are in harmony with material reality. In other words, we want to find out if they are true. And we also want to find out if the community rule promotes true righteousness and if it promotes if it promotes the only genuine way to obtain righteousness. Thus far in our investigation, everything that we have found in the community rule, all the claims are certainly true, and the idea of righteousness put forward is the genuine idea of righteousness, and the means of becoming righteous is also the true means. That's what we have found so far in our investigation. Yet, of course, it would be wrong of us to judge the whole of a document by a part. In other words, we have to investigate the whole thing in order to judge the whole thing. Both because one may put forward some true points mingled with falsehood, and also because it may be the case that the community rule was originally a composite document, was originally separate documents that were then combined together and is thus now a composite document. If that's the case, and if the various parts of the community rule were originally authored by separate individuals, then of course we need to understand that, and we need to judge each section independently. In any case, that's the basis of our investigation and what we are studying. So does anyone have any questions broadly related to the community rule? Again, broadly meaning that it is related, yet not necessarily on a specific line. Maybe it's our studies, the principles of our studies, or the overall time period, how it relates to the New Testament, whatever it may be. So any questions? Okay, so since there are no questions or comments, we will now go into studying line by line in the community rule. So the section that we are studying now is in 1QS, column 4, at around line 18 or 19.
18 to 19, in fact.
Okay, 18 to 19. There we go. Of course, 1QS is the designation for the best preserved copy of the community rule, and that's the one we are primarily studying at this point. Once we get into column 5, we'll have to talk about the various copies and all of that, and a bit of textual criticism. And if you guys aren't remembering what textual criticism is, it's essentially the study of different texts which represent one particular work, one literary work. And the study of textual criticism has as its primary aim to understand the history of the textual development of any ancient literary work in order to best represent its original wording, even to the letter when possible. But since the origin of textual criticism, its focus has expanded not only to trying to understand the quote-unquote original form of any text, because sometimes that's hard to define, or at least can have multiple possible definitions, but also just the history of the text overall, and also why certain things were changed at different times, and what that tells us about the people who changed the texts, and how people read the texts at different points in the text's history. So if it was changed at one point, and now someone reads it differently, well, that's going to impact their view of the text overall. So, for instance, the Gospel of Mark did not originally have verses 10 to, 19 or 21 or something. I think it's 21. Sure, or maybe it's even from verse 9 at the end of Mark. I think that, the first, Mark 16, the last chapter of Mark, originally had only the first 8 verses. Mm-hmm. And then there were several endings tagged on, and it was from verses 9 to 20. So the last 11 verses of Mark are a later addition. And that addition dramatically changes the experience that one would have in reading the Gospel of Mark all the way through. If you read the Gospel of Mark all the way through and it ends the way it originally did, that leaves one certain impression. But if you have this ending on it, it leaves a very different impression. So,
just in case anyone gets picky about it, it'd be the last 12 verses. But you said 11. It ends at 8, starts up at 9, so that would be 9 to 20 would be 12 verses.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, good point. Yes, the last 12 verses of Mark are, I should say the last 12 verses of Mark as we currently have it in most Bibles were added. And that is noted in most modern translations. So we recommend for people to read modern translations because you will most likely get a better understanding of the origin of each text and the development of each text, which is, of course, important to the meaning. So that's long enough of a side note anyway. So 1QS column 4, lines 18 and 19. What the text was just describing before this point is the hatred between the two principles, truth and falsehood, how they are totally opposed to each other. And the last two sentences before this one read, truth abhors the works of falsehood, and falsehood abhors all the ways of truth. And their struggle is fierce in all their arguments, for they do not walk together. Now, this next sentence is what we are going to be discussing. But in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, God has ordained an end for falsehood. And at the time of the visitation, he will destroy it forever. So, does anyone have any comments or questions on that sentence?
What a beautiful promise.
Amen. So maybe let's break the sentence up a little bit, because it might be, too big of a chunk to discuss in detail. So let's just take this first clause. But in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, God has ordained an end for falsehood. So what do you guys think it means that it is in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom that God has ordained an end for falsehood?
To me, it brings to mind the fact that sometimes, often, in fact, people will say, why does God allow this sin and suffering to continue? Why has it continued this long? And in a nutshell, I would say that the way we understand it is that because God understands the only way to bring an end to sin and suffering forever is to allow it to play out so that everyone actually sees really how horrific it is, and then to allow as much opportunity for people as possible to, have time to come to that realization for themselves and to choose to stop sinning. I don't know if that's all the aspects of it or if I'm even accurate on that, but that's what comes to my mind.
Okay.
I like the way you put that. It's very much the way I think of it, too.
Now, let me ask you guys, do you think that there's a distinction between saying something like, I'll give you another phrase that is basically altering what's here in the community rule, and tell me what you see as the difference between what I'm going to say and what the community rule actually says. But in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, God has ordained that there should be a time when the way of falsehood will last alongside the way of truth. What do you guys see as the difference between what I just said and what it actually says? What's the difference in focus?
The difference I see is you use the word lasting, and in the community rule it says there's an end. So you're saying it's lasting alongside of truth.
Okay, how about if I said temporarily lasting?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
Well, if we go back to 17, says he set everlasting hatred between their divisions. So could they be side by side if there's everlasting hatred between their divisions? I'm just asking here.
Well, it depends what you mean by that. The way in which I was using the term side by side is simply that they're coexisting. And, of course, it does describe them as coexisting with everlasting hatred between their divisions.
Yeah, so what I was bringing up really didn't pertain there. So
That's okay. The thing that I'm trying to highlight in this phrase is, of course we would often think of the mystery of the allowance of falsehood. But is this talking about the mystery of the allowance of falsehood, or is it talking about the mystery of the end of falsehood? Do you guys see the difference? Like, you could talk about how it's such a great mystery that, why is God allowing falsehood to exist? But it's not saying that in the mysteries of his wisdom, God has allowed falsehood to exist. It's saying in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, God has ordained an end for falsehood. So what do you think we can draw from that?
How I understand it is his mysterious wisdom and the way he's going to end falsehood is perfect in his own wisdom and something we might not understand at this time.
Okay, so that's interesting. That kind of leads to the next question that I was going to ask is, so the first thing is kind of, is the mystery in the allowance of falsehood, or is the mystery in the end of falsehood? And, of course, both, can be true, but the part that is specifying here is actually the end of falsehood. And then the next question I was going to ask is, what is the mystery? Is it a mystery that God is going to bring an end to falsehood? I mean, that wouldn't seem to be that mysterious. I mean, anyone would hope that God would bring an end to falsehood.
Well, it says it plainly right here, so it's not a mystery.
Right. However, I must say that just because something is said plainly here does not mean that it's not referring to it as a mystery, because this may be very well seeking to explain the mysteries of God. So, and for that reason also, it may, what you just said at the end, Anna, of it being a mystery to us now, that sort of thing, well, that may not be the case if the mysteries of God are being unfolded to us, and if they were being unfolded in the community established by the teacher of righteousness, because according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, he was having the mysteries of God revealed to him and through him. But one thing that you said, Anna, that's really significant is you said the way in which he's going to bring an end to falsehood. Now that is really more of a coherent way to understand this than thinking that it's simply talking about the fact that he's going to bring an end to falsehood. I don't think anyone, whether in modern times or ancient times, would consider that some great mystery, because they believed already from at least the time of Isaiah, which was several hundred years before this point, that eventually iniquity would be wiped away. So they knew that that was going to happen at some point. But the question is how? How is that going to happen? So here, in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, God has ordained an end for falsehood. So that's showing us that, well, yes, in the mysteries of God's understanding, he has ordained an end. So what is that end? It's the nature of that end.
How do you put an end to falsehood?
Exactly. How do you put an end?
You supplant it with the truth.
Amen. And this actually is what it says in the next sentence that we haven't gone into yet. Then truth, which has wallowed in the ways of wickedness during the dominion of falsehood until the appointed time of judgment, shall arise in the world forever. And then it goes on to specifically explain how God will purify the people from falsehood.
With the spirit of truth.
Exactly. So this is in the mysteries of his understanding. And this mystery, the mystery of the gospel, is actually the mystery that is being revealed here in the community rule, and which was more fully revealed in the proclamation of the mystery of God through the apostles, particularly through Paul, who in Ephesians explains the mystery of God. And of course, this is also touched on in Colossians and in other writings, I believe also at the end of Romans. But Paul talks about this and the mystery of God, Christ in you, the hope of glory, and explains what that means rather than just leaving it as some mysterious thing. He explains the mystery, so it's not a mystery anymore. And that's the simplicity of the gospel, and that's what was again lost and is now being restored. But there's something more to it than even just that. And of course, we'll talk about that as we progress through this. But yeah, I think it's very significant to recognize that what it's talking about is the mystery of how it has been ordained for falsehood to come to an end. So now it says, so again, let's just make sure we're not going to miss anything here. In the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom. And because it's talking about his glorious wisdom, in his glorious wisdom, in his understanding, it seems to be that it's actually talking about the attribute, the fact that God is wise, rather than talking about the person herself. So, of course, just because we learned that wisdom is a person doesn't mean that every time we see the word wisdom, it's talking about the person wisdom. Likewise, the word word refers to a person in some contexts. That doesn't mean that every time you read the word word in the Bible or in ancient Jewish writings that it's talking about a person. Same thing with Yeshua means salvation. It doesn't mean that every time you read the word salvation, it's talking about Jesus. So everything has its own context and range of meanings and usage. So here, God, being as understanding as he is and being as wise as he is, he has a thorough understanding of how this works. And he's very wise. He's able to implement that understanding. And through that, he has ordained a particular end for falsehood. And at the time of the visitation, he will destroy it forever. So what do you guys think? At the time of the visitation, what's that?
The judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly agree with that. Now, this is really interesting because it talks about the visitation earlier in the community rule, right? Earlier in the same column, in fact. Column 4, line, I believe this is around line 8. And as for the visitation of all who walk in this spirit, it shall be healing, great peace, and a long life, etc., etc. Well, this is talking about the time of the judgment, the time in which people receive their rewards. And it's talking about the, this visitation upon those who walk according to the Spirit of truth. And then further down at line 12 or 13 or so, it says, and the visitation of all who walk in this spirit, being the spirit of falsehood, shall be a multitude of afflictions by the hand of all the messengers of destruction, and so on. Okay, so this is talking about final judgment stuff, right? And we know it's talking about final judgment because just before this, it says, for God has set these two spirits as equals until the final age. Well, if it's until the final age, well then the judgment, the visitation, must be in the final age, because at the time of visitation, he destroys it, falsehood, forever. So they both coexist, these two principles, truth and falsehood, coexist alongside each other as equals until the final age, and then at the visitation, at the time of the visitation, he will destroy it forever. And then, of course, the next sentence, then truth, which has wallowed in the ways of wickedness during the dominion of falsehood, until the appointed time of judgment shall arise in the world forever. Okay, so the appointed time of judgment and the visitation are the same thing, and they take place in the final age. So the final age is defined by this time in which falsehood comes to an end and the war between them is over. So that's obviously very, very important. Something else that I want to say about the time of visitation and this final judgment, when reading this in terms of the earlier sections of column 4, where it's talking about the visitation of those who walk in the spirit of truth, and then the visitation of all who walk in the spirit of falsehood, one might think, well, this is clearly talking about, some post-probationary event, because everything is coming to its climax. However, what we find in this section of column 4 shows us that the visitation begins during a time when people are still being cleansed from sin. In other words, this is not what we would refer to as a post-probationary event. This is a probationary event. In other words, takes place while people are still in the deciding process. How do we know that? Well, because God has ordained an end for falsehood, and at the time of the visitation, he will destroy it forever. Then truth, so then at the time of visitation, truth, which has wallowed in the ways of wickedness during the dominion of falsehood until the appointed time of judgment, shall arise in the world. God will then purify every deed of man with his truth. He will refine for himself some from the children of humanity by extinguishing falsehood from the inner bounds of his flesh. He will cleanse him of all his deeds of wickedness with the spirit of holiness. Like purifying waters, he will sprinkle upon him the spirit of truth to cleanse him from all abomination and falsehood, and he shall be plunged into the spirit of purification, that he may instruct the upright in the knowledge of the Most High, and teach the wisdom of the children of heaven to the perfect way. For God has chosen them for an everlasting covenant, and all the glory of Adam shall be theirs. There shall be no more lies, and all the works of falsehood shall be put to shame. Okay, so all of that describes the purification of mankind. It describes having sin washed away. This shows that the visitation, the time of judgment, begins at a time when salvation is still open. This, of course, is so very much in harmony with the core of the Seventh-day Adventist message, in that, of course, it talks about a pre-close of probation judgment that not only takes place in heaven, but also takes place on earth with the purifying of God's people. So I think that that's a very striking parallel. Any other comments on that element? Okay, I guess not. one thing that I will mention in the last phrase of this sentence, he will destroy it forever. People might have the tendency to view that as being an instantaneous event, the destruction of falsehood. And that's clearly not the case in the context of the community rule, because when it describes the truth arising, it says that the truth is the thing that purifies and extinguishes falsehood from man, which shows that it's not like, boom, falsehood is destroyed, and then there's nothing, and then truth gets introduced. No. Light grows and expands and overcomes the darkness. It's not like darkness can be taken away without the use of light, and then light comes. No, darkness is the absence of light and must be vanquished by means of light. Just so, falsehood is the absence of truth and must be vanquished by means of truth. And so this destruction of falsehood is actually, when viewing it in its outworking through the world, it's a process where each individual comes in contact with truth and is purified by it, and then another individual will be. It's not like every individual is purified at the same time. And of course, there's a process of purification, and this is very much tied to ritual purity, as also shown by the sprinkling of water imagery and all of that, purifying waters. This is ritual language, and actually it has even more tied specifically to the sacrifice of the red heifer and so on. But this is ritual purification, and we know that there are different purity zones, different layers of impurity, and then people can become pure and put on holiness and all of those sorts of things. So there's an individual process of someone having their errors removed from them, being replaced by truth. And then there's also the corporate process where this happens at different times for different individuals. And again, this is just, even though the community rule does not state it as plainly in terms of its process as I'm stating it right now, it's clearly present here in the community rule that it's not that falsehood just suddenly stops, there's no more falsehood, it's destroyed, and then truth is brought in. No, truth is the thing which brings an end to falsehood. So truth overcomes falsehood. That is how falsehood is destroyed forever. So when it says then in this passage, it's not to be understood that after the preceding event, the following takes place. As in, the word then is not being used to describe something following the preceding event. It's being used to describe something taking place at the same time as the preceding mentioned event, as the previously mentioned event, I should say. So, in other words, in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, God has ordained an end for falsehood. And at the time of the visitation, he will destroy it forever. Then, at that time, truth, which has wallowed in the ways of wickedness during the dominion of falsehood until the appointed time of judgment, shall arise in the world forever. God will then, or God will at that time, purify every deed of man with his truth. So that needs to be kept in mind, because sometimes then can be used to describe a subsequent event to the previously mentioned event, but at other times, such as here, it is used to describe a contemporary event to the previously mentioned event.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that's clear.
That's clear to me.
Good, excellent. Any comments or questions on that?
I'm glad you explained that, because I was trying to figure out, okay, is it just this, sudden thing, and then the next phase and the next phase? But it's, to me, as now you explain it, it's like the dawning of day, right? It's dark, and as the light keeps showing up, it eventually gets extinguished, right? Or it eventually the light unveils, right?
Amen. Exactly. In the morning at the sunrise. It's actually, as the song says, the dominion of darkness, it shall fade away, and truth shall have the day. And that's how it happens. So, amen.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained that too, because I would have understood it as being probably instantaneous too. Yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, I can understand just the wording of it. Someone might think that just the way it's put in English and the way we use the word then and all of that sort of thing. And often we think of a destruction as a sudden event, but not all destructions are. Some destructions take place very slowly over a long period of time, where something is being demolished, destroyed, corrupted.
Well, and just look at our own experience. I mean, the truth is whittling away at the falsehood that has taken residence in our understanding for our lives. And one day, that falsehood will be destroyed. But it took time for the truth to penetrate and for it to really take root and take hold. So just seeing how our Heavenly Family is progressively giving us more and more truth, that's destroying more and more of the lies that we've had in our brain, and we've believed things that weren't so, like immateriality. And I think when we look at it that way, it's very easy to see the nature of how falsehood is destroyed by truth, and that it's not all of a sudden falsehood's gone and now here's truth.
Exactly.
There's no way to get rid of falsehood without truth.
I was paying close attention to the way you express things. I like how you expressed it, where you said one day it will be destroyed. And then there's another expression that you used. You said that truth is destroying, present tense, the falsehood. And another phrase that I'll add to that is being destroyed, which is basically the same as destroying. But, to say that he will destroy it forever is talking about the fact that, he will bring it to an end, and he will bring it to an end in a certain way. And then the following sentences describe exactly how that will take place, and it's certainly a gradual process where there will be a period where it is being destroyed. So I'm going to now make a statement to discuss kind of the reality of this, though this is not an explanation of the community rule, what I'm about to say. This is an explanation of the reality that is the same reality to which the community rule refers, but the community rule obviously was not describing anything at this time, as in the days in which we live. It's not actually describing that. It's talking about an event whenever it may happen. So, the dominion of darkness has been going on for a long time, and truth and falsehood have been fighting with each other And there have been various times where light has come to bring an end to falsehood. So it's not, again, like there is simply one day when it's just going to happen and that's it. No, there are times when truth begins to at least push back darkness. And of course you have in John chapter 1 talking about the light, the word coming down, and it's this great light, and the darkness comprehended it not. Well, that's not a very clear translation for modern readers. Most modern translations place it in a way that is far more comprehensible to us who don't use the word comprehend in the same way that it was used in the year 1611. What it means is that darkness has not overcome it. Light came into the world and darkness has not overcome the light. So you have this strife between light and darkness. And Jesus came and lightened the world with his glory. Yet, darkness did overcome at some point. Not entirely. Light has never been entirely lost. But darkness sure prevailed through the quote-unquote dark ages.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Revelation 10, we have this angel come down. And what happens? Well, the angel evidently is going to brighten some things up, because feet as pillars of fire is going to shine some light on something. And face shining as the sun, that's bringing some light into the world. A representation of the early Advent movement with the Shekinah among them. That is the time of judgment, when God is bringing darkness to an end. Yet, there's even more than that, because there's a time even after that when the angel of Revelation 18:1 comes down and lightens the earth with his glory. Lightens the earth. Wow, that's pretty profound. Isaiah uses imagery like this: arise and shine, for thy light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. And then we also have Isaiah talking about the sun shining 7 times brighter. So we have this day of light that is forecasted, and obviously we've understood the nature of prophecy to be not deterministic, rather descriptive of general events and patterns, series of events, and which may take place at different points in time depending on what people choose, but it's basically plans laid out. It's a blueprint, if you will, or something akin to that. And right now, certainly we can say that our Heavenly Family in a different way is accomplishing this work of truth destroying falsehood, because they're actually defining for us precisely what truth is and precisely what falsehood is, and really destroying falsehood from our conceptions. This is so important. And of course, destroying the ways of falsehood as well. That requires the destruction of sin. And so the resurrection of the dry bones, in its fullest sense, is the destruction of falsehood, not only in terms of ideas, but in terms of actions as well. And that is the ultimate fulfillment of this. So the ultimate fulfillment of this has begun, Whether it is carried all the way through or not is up to us as individuals. But the ultimate fulfillment of this has begun in this phase of the message, even though previous fulfillments of it and fulfillments of it in different manifestations, in different ways, have begun in previous phases. It's kind of like the sealing. Being sealed is to settle into the truth intellectually and spiritually. Well, there's been an intellectual sealing going on for a long time, but it only becomes spiritual when we carry it into our practical life and allow it to revive us. Not just reform, but to revive us, to become new creations. So this is a wonderful, wonderful prophecy. And who could say that this is not actually a prophecy or a prediction, at least using the word prophecy in that way? So thus far, I'd say that the prophecy stands and is also in harmony with all the other prophecies that we have concerning this great, wonderful event.
Me too.
Yeah, amen. Any other comments on this? Okay, perhaps not. Well, we've been on for an hour now, and I think this is a good place to stop. And as we've spoken of before, we don't have to have an hour and a half or 2 hour or 3 hour meeting all the time. It's kind of nice to have just hour-long meetings. So would anyone like to thank our Heavenly Family?
I will. Heavenly Family, thank you for shedding light upon us, for showering us with your truth, or with the truth, and using it to wash away the falsehood that has consumed us. Heavenly Family, please help us to really get it. Help us to learn to recognize sin in all its forms and to recognize temptations when they come, and to allow the Spirit of Truth to cleanse us. And by that, then, to be able to be used by you in a powerful way. So may thy kingdom come quickly. Thank you in the name of Branch. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.